You're listening to The Rich Life Revolution with me, Michelle Cooper. My mission is to empower you to step into your next level of wealthy. You'll hear all the deets, a little bit of inspiration, and real life takeaways so that you can create your own rich life revolution. Let's dig in. Hey girl, hey, welcome to the Rich Life Revolution. I'm your host, Michelle Cooper. We are dreaming big in today's episode. Welcome to episode 80 with my guest, Francine. Now, let me tell you, this lady is incredible. She is dreaming big and she's building bridges along the way. In our episode today, I am so thrilled to have Francine with us. She is the inspiring founder of the foundation Mothers to Daughters, of which, guilty plug here, I am a member of the board. Francine shares with us her powerful story of moving from Cameroon to Canada. That's a huge move. Overcoming cultural and language barriers, and ultimately founding a global movement dedicated to empowering immigrant women, or as in Canada, we call them newcomers. Through her experiences, Francine highlights the importance of mentorship, community, and the courage to pursue bold dreams. So you're going to get so much out of this episode. Let's dive in and hear everything, soak it all up that Francine has to drop on us. Hey, Francine, how are you today?
Hello, Michelle. So good to see you. I'm really doing amazing. Just so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Awesome. My pleasure. Absolutely. So a little bit of backstory for my listeners here. Francina and I met at a women's entrepreneurial event in Florida. I think it was May 2024. And we actually were sitting across from each other at lunch. Didn't know each other, got chatting about, why each of us were there. And she shared some of her story with me, and I was deeply moved. I think you have an incredible story and you're doing incredible work in the world. So I wanted to bring you onto the Rich Life Revolution so that you can share that as inspiration, but also to share the message of your foundation, Mothers to Daughters. So I just love you. I think you're amazing. We had so much fun at that lunch and, at that event and stuff. Like, it was just awesome.
It was
So,
great.
yeah, it was so good. So tell us a little bit about you. Like, where are you originally from? Where did you kind of move to? Like, tell me your story, Francine. Let's jump in the deep end.
Alrighty. Oh my goodness. Wow. Going down memory lane, as they call it. I was born and raised in beautiful Cameroon. That's where I was fortunate to have my upbringing in a family of girls only. I have to say, the 6 of us.
Wow.
And yeah, it wasn't easy. You can imagine growing up around girls, being the second born and just having to be the big sister and being there for everyone. I was fortunate to have parents that really invested in us having the best. And part of that best was, even though themselves, they had not moved away from Cameroon to actually pursue studies abroad, that's what they wanted for their children. And I got myself in a position, or they put me in a position, where Canada became a country where I had to pursue my studies. So I remember leaving Cameroon when I was 19 years old. and not knowing anything about the Western culture. I had traveled around, but never really stayed in any permanently, because 14 years later, I'm still in North America. So I started in Canada, Ottawa. We chose Ottawa because at the time I only spoke French fluently. I wasn't able to pursue my studies in English. So Ottawa was a natural choice. They had a bilingual university. I didn't necessarily want to be in an only French environment. I was telling myself, even though Cameroon is bilingual, I was more French than anything else. I had the written English, but I couldn't possibly study in English only. And I also, because I like stretching myself and stepping out of my comfort zone, I wanted to get my English up and running as fast as possible. So when I moved to Ottawa, I studied economics, had a minor in management. My first 2 years were dedicated to adapting. It wasn't easy. I moved alone, barely knew anyone. I had to almost create that support system for myself, which at the time were friends that were also had also moved from away from Canada, coming to Canada to study. So, and the first 2 years of my undergrad, I only studied in French. And then I took upon myself to change that. I said, well, if you're going to want to be bilingual and fluent, maybe it's time for you to really take that big jump. And I did finish my undergrad degree studying English in English only. It was very challenging because it was not quite the second language at the time, and I did that.
Right.
And something that really led me throughout all of these different moves was having my parents in mind, having my mother specifically reminding me how it's important to challenge myself, how it's important to step out of my comfort zone. So that was really the premise. And I had lofty dreams when I was in university. I used to go to the bank and I used to think, oh my God, I would like to be that person on the other side of the counter, transacting and all of that. I just thought the service was stellar. And at the time, I was really eyeing the Royal Bank of Canada. And I also had a dream to say, I want to work for the Bank of Canada. And then very soon I realized you needed to be a Canadian. And at the time I was an international student. So I never got to fulfill that as fast as I wanted. So it was natural for me after the Bank of Canada to go after the first bank in Canada at the time. I don't know if RBC is still first, but I started really working towards that goal because I was envisioning myself moving up the ladder. I was envisioning myself servicing people, learning and adapting. And what a better way to adapt to a culture than to start working and actually learning about the hows and the whats. So right after college, I started working at RBC. I was very grateful that someone gave me the opportunity to start my career there. Very, very grateful when I think about it because it could have been anyone else. I remember when I had my first job, everyone around me was so thrilled. How did you do it? And 3 years in, still in Ottawa, I was learning. I was adjusting. At that time, obviously, I was already bilingual to some extent because I was also servicing Quebec. So it was really an amazing foundation for me to dream even bigger. But what I had not realized when I was navigating my career in retail banking at the time was that I was doing things that were attracting different cultures and mentoring that I had never been exposed to formally. And I did not necessarily call it that then. I just thought, oh, all my managers really want to invest in me. They treat me like a daughter. They understand that I'm not in the country with my family. So there was always an extension to come to my house, for Thanksgiving. We don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Canada. So all of that was so new to me. And that was really the
Right.
first time for me to experience that. And fast forward, I decided to challenge myself even more. From the little city of Ottawa, I started eyeing Toronto. And
Ooh, that's a big move in Canada.
it's a big move in Canada because in Ottawa, and I know you've been in Ottawa, it's a very, everyone works for the government. It's very safe in terms of as soon as you're done school or to an extent start your career, you get married, you have a nice little house either in Gatineau or Ottawa, but I didn't want that for myself. I wanted something bigger. And I was eyeing the headquarters of RBC. Little did I know that a client of mine's mother was recruiting in Ottawa, and she's actually the one who referred me to the headquarters in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
Yes, that's how I landed in Toronto. So again, I was just doing things that um my drive was just fueling all of it without this. I just knew I wanted more. I wanted more than Ottawa. I wanted to work for the Gold Building because I used to visit Toronto and I was seeing the beautiful building across Union Station. And I told myself, oh my God, I cannot wait to work here. So in 2018, seeing myself actually be there where the most important decisions of RBC I made was just another tick, another check to my list. I was just so thrilled,
Right.
filled with gratitude. And when I got there, the reality of the corporate life hit. It hit me
Mm.
very hard because the things I had envisioned were not exactly what I was experiencing. I believe I was already developing a sense of, I want to do more than just work. I want to make sure that whoever I associate myself with has deep care for the community. So when I realized very quickly how the political correctness was the norm to navigate those
Mm.
places, and being too ambitious was not very welcome in that place, which I clearly was after leaving Cameroon, Ottawa, and now Toronto. I started investing my time in the community. I started mentoring, in addition to my job, mentoring newcomers, and it really shed a light around my own privilege coming to Canada and having people who invested in me without me having to ask anything, and people that are coming in Canada and not necessarily having that support. And for me, always trended around women that were much more experienced than me and women that were also older in age than me. So fast forward, those realities made me pause. And I told myself, okay, it's been 8 years now. And there is a common denominator here. How did I get here? Someone had invested in me. They were not looking like me, no background similar than mine, but I was seeing the power of diversity, the power of giving back, the power of women, nurturing women, because they were the ones that had led me there, starting with my mother. And I took upon myself to give back not only outside of work, but to create that community for myself so no one has to feel they have to look too hard to actually create that support system. Those are the thoughts that
Right.
led me to create Mothers to Daughters.
Right.
And
Right.
Mothers to
I think,
Daughters, yeah,
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Mothers to Daughters, again, just like if you see all the different points that I mentioned here, there was the need for mentoring, but intergenerational mentoring, right? Because I had my peers to rely upon, but they were not exactly the right people that could have catapulted my career or even my integration. It was the people that really did that were outside of that immediate support system, as I like to call it, because family and friends, that's the immediate support system. The people that had contributed to
Hmm.
my career success were outside of that support system.
It's so good. It's so, obviously you're a highly driven person, right? And someone that, has accomplished a lot in a short amount of time, right? You're not my age, that's for sure, right? And I think, leaving Cameroon at such a young age to a country that's very different, right? Even weather, right? Like you come from a hot climate and you're
Yes.
in Ottawa, which Ottawa in the winter, in case my listeners don't know, is brutal. Okay.
Brutal. Brutal. The
It is,
snowstorm.
right?
Yeah.
Right? Even I know, it not in the same way whatsoever, but my husband, he came from the UK. He came from London, and obviously I'm from British Columbia. And when my kids were kind of getting to school age, we immigrated back to Canada. And he even was like, it is cold here. Like, what, what is going on in this country? Like, it is freaking cold, right? And so, I can imagine being from a really hot climate that just that physical temperature is a lot to deal with. And then there's, all the other cultural aspects. You mentioned things like Thanksgiving and stuff, where I think that can be really kind of lonely if you're kind of plopped down somewhere. You don't have a family. Your community might be quite small, or your circle could be quite small, and then all these families are getting together for Thanksgiving, and you're like, well, what do I do? Right. So I'm glad to hear that people, welcomed you in to their celebrations and their families, and their homes, but that doesn't happen for everyone. Right. Um, and, I, I have worked around the world, and I have been on my own in countries that I didn't speak the language, and I didn't have a big circle of support, and it can be really lonely, and it can be hard, right, to navigate that. And so kudos to you, because it's amazing, where you are. Obviously, I love your foundation and the work that you're doing. I think it's so important. I know that, immigration is a hot topic in our world. And, with the political leaders and some of their stances on things, are pretty extreme. Even I remember having a conversation with you where you were saying, like, in Canada, we know the word newcomers, right? We use that word a lot in Canada, and there's quite a bit of support, I think. I remember kind of tapping into some of that for my husband when he first came over. I don't think that that's everywhere in the world. I don't think they use that word everywhere. I think you raised my awareness to that in the United States, it's just not a word that's used quite frequently to reference people who are new to the United States.
Exactly.
So do you find in your work, your advocacy work with mothers to daughters, that do you find there's certain aspects that are harder to navigate?
Absolutely. Like you said at the beginning of this conversation, it's okay to start something locally, and it's another to tap into the global stage. And this
Totally.
awareness of newcomers versus other terms that are used, for instance, a country like the United States, has really shed a light around how categorized immigrants can sometimes be, right? And it's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a bad thing, but there's definitely been some challenges in the way those terms are used, because you have here in the United States, you use more refugees, for instance. We also use that term in Canada, but we do differ newcomers to refugees.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start wanting to make an impact, there definitely is a need to just acknowledge the fact that it's someone, being an immigrant is a thing, right? Like, I think an immigrant can be one, second, third generation, but that's the essence of it all. And there's a need for education when it comes to that. You mentioned political leaders, you mentioned, and those are not always easy conversations, but like at Mothers to Daughters, we're really trying to change um, women's conditions one conversation at a time. And that's really what
Oh,
drives me. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I love that, right? And so, I did recently, I did a Facebook post about this because, like, full transparency, I've accepted nomination to the board of directors for Mothers to Daughters, and I feel very passionate about the work. I come from a family of immigrants to Canada. Now, they came from the UK. My parents came from the UK. They were the first people in my whole lineage to leave the UK to seek a better life for themselves and their children, right? And they had my brothers at the time. I wasn't born yet. And I I am one of the few in my whole family. There's three of us basically that have been born in Canada, right? And I know, like I shared this in my Facebook post, I remember my dad telling me that my mom, she missed England. She missed her friends. She missed her family. She missed her parents. She missed the food. She missed the lifestyle, right? Even though it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, it was actually really hard, right? She still missed it. And there was times where she was really lonely. And my parents made family out of friendships. So my brothers and I grew up with people we called aunts and uncles that were just really good friends of
Yeah.
my parents, right? Because I didn't know my aunts and uncles. Like eventually, my dad's brother and his wife, my aunt and uncle, they moved to Canada. My dad sponsored them. They moved over and, did the whole thing. But before that, I didn't know I never met my grandparents, right? And so it's like there's the whole thing of like women leaving their home like you did, leaving their mother behind and their sisters maybe and like their world, coming to a new country, and then what? Right? Like, and then they got to kind of like start from scratch and they got to make it up kind of thing, right? And it's not easy. And it's probably easier, maybe a little bit easier now, maybe, than it was back when my parents left. My parents left like in the late 50s, early 60s. I don't know what exact year it was, but it was a long time ago. And we didn't have the internet, and they couldn't just hop on a phone call and talk to somebody, right? A little bit different now. And that's why I feel so passionate about the work that Mothers to Daughters does, because like you said, it's totally shifting a woman's life one conversation at a time, one, support initiative at a time, right? It could look a variety of different ways, I think. But such important work, right? And like I had mentioned before we started recording, it's one thing to set up a foundation or not for profit or whatever and say I'm going to support my local community. It's another to do what you're doing, which is the global stage, right? You're at the UN, like you're going big on this, right? Which doesn't surprise me given what I know about you and your story and stuff like that. And people moving around the world happens around the world, right? Like I think a lot of times when people think immigration, they think people leaving less developed countries and coming to North America. And that's not the whole picture, right?
Yeah.
People go all kinds of places, right? And women need help all over the place, right? As you mentioned.
Yeah. You said
So
it so
good.
well.
Yeah, so good. So tell us a little bit about, like, obviously you have like incredible vision, right? Have you always had that? Like, has this always been in you, or is this something like you nurtured and you developed and stuff?
Definitely the latter. I When I was a child or when I was growing up, I just saw my parents put so much faith in me, first by making me very responsible. I was the one almost giving petty cash to everyone at home. I just I've always had that sense of responsibility. I wasn't necessarily dreaming so big then, outside of, because America was actually my first choice. That's also another thing.
Mm-hmm.
The obstacle, just like I mentioned, was the language barrier. I would have had to spend so much time having to learn, and so that was as far as my dreams went back then. Just envisioning myself being there, because when you're exposed to music, which I'm really fanatic of, you start envisioning yourself being living a certain lifestyle and just hanging out and whatnot. But it really is the moment I stepped foot in Canada. I just really paused and very humbly and gratefully just acknowledge what my parents have just did. Right? They just
Mm-hmm.
really put everything aside. At the time we were building a house, that was on pause. My family, we come from a middle class family, so they worked really hard for me to even have this opportunity once again. I'm first generation Canadian. So when you have that much support, and I'll never forget the words of my dad, knowing how introverted I am and still am, or I was back then. I know you're really introverted and keeping it for yourself, but you're going someplace now and you're going to have to open up. Those were all seeds to really
Mm-hmm.
enable me to dream big, bigger and bigger. Because at first I had moved to Ottawa, and then I still had the United States in mind to an extent. And it wasn't necessarily for the name, it was for the drive that came with it. That's what I was
Mm-hmm.
pursuing. But the timing wasn't right then, right? So the people I met saw in me things I couldn't see as well. That enabled me. I
Mm-hmm.
was told once I had no passion by a very close friend of mine. And at that time, he may have been right, because I wasn't really articulating my dreams to people. I was just living and going. I just knew deep down I am meant to go great places. Without this, I couldn't really, 10 years ago tell you exactly what I would do. But my support system, my mentors, my family has contributed enormously to this drive I've developed, because I've let myself the time to grow. I believe in timing. I believe in all of these different things. They all are ingredients that make the recipe of me now. Because I can't exactly tell you where I will be in 10 years, but I know it will be a better place than where I currently am. Because I absorb all these, it's almost like they are prophets. People just look at me and they place me here. I had never dreamt
Mm-hmm.
of the UN per se, other than saying, oh, it would be great to work for the United Nations. I don't get to work for the United Nations, but I get to be invited to represent my organization, because the silent dreams that I have, one way or another, come to pass.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think there's so many women out there with those silent dreams, right? And it can be scary to voice those dreams out into the world. If you don't feel, even if you just don't feel safe in everyday life, right?
Yeah,
If you're walking around and you just don't feel safe in your life, then how do you dream, right?
right.
I had a friend recently share with me. She said, I just want to thank you because you are helping me dream again. I had turned off that part of me. And now I see that I can dream again and it's okay. Right. So
Yeah,
I love that. I think we all should have dreams. And we should be okay to say them out loud. Right. And not worry about like, oh, how are we going to get there? And what are the steps and, all the things, right? Like you didn't know that working for RBC and their headquarters in Toronto was not going to be what you desired, but it's a step along the way, right?
Yes, I believe
So
in that. Yeah.
yeah, we don't have to kind of judge those steps. We can just be like, okay, this is one of the things along the way. And I think that even when things don't work out the way we imagine, they're absolutely working out perfectly for us, right? Even if it's crappy, right? Even if it's the most crappiest thing ever, there's still something there for us, I think.
Think about the way we make a cake, just the process of, you know, baking a cake and all the mess and eggs and the everything along those lines for that product. It's a process, right? I think that's how I approach dreams. That's how I approach even goals, right? Giving yourself the grace to say it may not be now, but it will be afterwards, or maybe there's a better way to get there, right? I'm always in self introspection to remind myself that it's okay to have bold dreams and silent dreams as well, but don't forget that process. Don't forget to tap into that faith, and also asking for guidance from God on what's really good for you, because the things that we want are not always good for us, right? So sometimes it's
Right?
direction, sometimes it's just, making it a little, pacing the flow and the speed, and it's the process to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So what's on the agenda for mothers to daughters for you in 2025? Like, where are we going with this, and how can people get involved and support you?
Oh, thank you. Mothers to Daughters 2025, I can't believe it's going to be 5 years, first of all, since we started. Even though 2020, for the most part, was just us being an online community, and it took us until 2021 to register as an NGO. For us, 2025 means celebrating the journey that we just had. Every single year came incremental growth, which again, I'm so comfortable with. I'm not racing
Mhm.
against anyone. We are doing the work that we do at a pace I'm very comfortable with. Everything we've accomplished this year, if you had asked me, maybe it would have taken 10 years, right? So next
Mhm.
year, I want to use the same formula and just really embrace opportunities, more collaborations. And really, like you said, we are in this critical time where we're shifting from local to global, and see how that global mothers to daughters is going to look like. See how we can partner not just locally, but globally, to really raise awareness around intergenerational mentorship. So that's really what 2025 looks like for us. And if anyone would like to join or contribute to what we do, um, please connect with me. Connect with Michelle as well. As she disclosed, she is part of this community, and we're always accepting and inviting volunteers, partners, people who want to really do good, and also to help organization with their CSR goals. We're always accepting sponsors and donors. And the best way to reach out to me will be by email. It's Francine at mothers2daughters.ca. And we have our website as well, mothers2daughters.ca, where you get to see how we've been able to accomplish this work, in addition to our social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
That's so good. So good. We'll put all the links in the show notes so that people can follow
Thank you.
you and support the work that's being done in the world. What does 2025 hold for Francine?
Oh my goodness, 2025. At Mothers to Daughters, the global approach of Mothers to Daughters is obviously infectious, because I just spent 14 years in Canada, and for me it's now, how do I apply my African, European, Canadian experience and American experience to help businesses succeed as a consultant. And that's really what I want to focus on as I'm entering 2025 and be an immigrant and a global citizen. You say you're from the UK. I've never been to the UK. I would love to visit the UK. I do have some partners there. So I want to work on really exciting projects that will not just drive revenue growth, but really speak for social impact, because that's really what makes a difference. That's what makes us live in a world where we're proud to wake up every single day. And as you know, there's a lot of work to be done. So I want to really work with conscious leaders to see how to drive that at a reasonable pace, but sustainable. That's what my 2025 personally look like.
Do you ever get to go back to Cameroon?
I definitely am. I went back a couple of years ago, and 2025 is also the time where I'm making that travel. So I very much look forward to that. And also visit Nigeria. Nigeria is almost a cousin country of mine. I've been there many times, and I have so many dear friends there. So I will definitely make a trip in Africa, in specifically Cameroon, Nigeria, and hopefully Benin as well, because most of my closest friends are from there. So I'm looking
Oh,
forward.
that's so good. Your
Yeah,
parents must be so proud, Francine. They really must be.
thank you.
That's
My mom
That's
definitely
awesome.
is, especially after Mothers to Daughters was inspired mainly by her. So I think when she thinks
Yeah.
about the impact I'm making, that makes her proud for have made that sacrifice to send me abroad.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Thank you for taking this time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm a huge fan. And so I just want to encourage people to, follow Mothers to Daughters. They're up to really big things. There are incredible people involved in the organization. And I think that over the next few years, we're going to see your impact even more. And it's so needed in our world. So thank you for all that you're doing to make the world a better place, and thank you for your time today. And I just love you. You're amazing. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today and sharing in this amazing experience speaking with Francine. She truly has an inspirational story, and I love that she is building her new life, her rich life, and creating a global movement at the same time. This has been another awesome episode of the Rich Life Revolution podcast. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you got at least one gold nugget today. Be sure to grab your copy of the Rich Life Revolution workbook to help you set the foundation for your next level of wealthy. Get it now at richliferevolution.ca, and I'll see you later.